One thing we've always liked about Destiny and Destiny 2 is the fact that these games have raids as this type of post-game content that really puts everything that the game has to offer in a really challenging format. I mean, raids are the ultimate test of not only your own abilities as a player, but also your teamwork and communication skills, as a lot of the times these raids have convoluted puzzles and sequences that really need a full team of 6 people coordinating if you want to even have a chance at completing them. And while a typical group doing a raid, specifically like the Leviathan Raid from Destiny 2, can take a group of unfamiliar players anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours to complete for the first time. And for a more experienced group, it can still take them between 35 minutes and an hour. But somehow, these players managed to beat the entire Leviathan Raid with all the encounters and final boss fight in just 13 minutes and 49 seconds. Seriously, some of the techniques they used in this raid to game the system and speed through it are absolutely amazing. So today we're going to break down how this team of speedrunners managed to beat it in just 13 minutes and 49 seconds. Let's go ahead and get into it. Now, of course, before we start, huge shout out to Granger and to Aoterra. These guys were both extremely helpful in getting information for how they managed to pull this off, and they of course offered up their footage for us to use. Links to their channels are in the description down below. We'll be looking over this raid, but if you've never done a raid before, we'll be doing the best we can to explain how the raid is done normally versus how they managed to do it in the speedrun. So jumping into this raid, this one was actually uploaded on January 1st, 2020. So this is a really recent speedrun, and they actually utilized some newer strategies, so this video will be actually really up to date with how they managed to pull this stuff off. For the sake of this run, Team Fast consisted of Aoterra, Claw, Ever, Flux, Ziggy, and Granger, and they all had really important integral roles in making this run work. Now, jumping into a raid, the typical course for completing this specific raid is to complete the 3 main encounters before entering the final encounter, where you face off against Callus, the main boss. The 3 main encounters, which we will be referring to them by their nicknames, are Pools, Dogs, and Gauntlet. Now, in Destiny 2, this specific raid actually changes order every single week. And for the sake of this specific speedrunning strategy that they use here, the most optimal time to run this raid to get the fastest speed possible is on the weeks where you can get the Gauntlet first, Dog second, and Pools last. Which means if you're trying to get the new world record, you're only going to have 8 weeks in 2020 where you'll have the optimal order for the speedrun. So in a typical raid run, your fire team will drop in on the Leviathan, and teams will move together to make their way to the outdoor plaza, where typically part of the team will split up, collect flags, while the other team stays behind protecting the flag area. Once all the flags are then collected, the doors will open up and the players will be able to move on to the first encounter. Now, the team that's speedrunning this have a little bit of a different strategy. Firstly, we need to look at some of their loadouts here. Essentially, all 6 Guardians are Warlocks, starting off with lightweight weapons and maxed out mobility, running Dawnblade and using a strategy involving which is a sword that is an exotic power weapon. Now, of course, throughout the raid, they do change up their classes and which weapons they use for different types of encounters to best maximize the optimization, and Aoterra actually has some guides set up for some of the raids, which strats to use for which classes, so you can check out his video, but we're just going to focus on the most crucial stuff here. Now, right away, you're going to notice that these Warlocks are moving extremely quickly, and that's because they're utilizing a trick which they like to call World Line Zero skating. Essentially, these guys combine a burst glide and a forward swing by swinging it off near a ledge and using bunny jumps to get a bunch of momentum. This causes the players to move extremely quickly and stay in the air for a long time, and they're able to clear some really huge jumps. It's a little tricky to learn, but it's not something that's impossible either, and with the right amount of practice, it's something any player can definitely pick up. Now, starting off, where typically all the players would move up together to the main plaza area, 2 players take an out of bounds route and start heading to the Gauntlet, while the other 4 players head also out of bounds to a shortcut that leads them to the elevator that would bring them into the Gauntlet normally. This is really interesting to look at because these players actually have a full understanding of where they can and can't go in the out of bounds section, how they can clip through certain walls, and just what they're capable of doing here, and it's really fun to watch. Of course, this out of bounds part is crucial for the speedrun because knowing the route is going to be one of the main sources of saving your time and optimizing time in a speedrun. So these guys really had to spend a lot of time practicing exact routes and patterns platforms that they were going to run when doing this out of bounds stuff. Once the 4 players make it to the Gauntlet elevator, they move up into the regular Gauntlet room, and the 2 players who are out of bounds actually remain out of bounds, and they stay right at the border of the Gauntlet running section. Now, when you get to the Gauntlet Encounter, typically, your team would pick 4 players to stand on platforms, while 2 other players would serve as the runners, and when the time comes, will teleport outside of the main area into a gauntlet-like ring, where they have to give callouts to their teammates as to what they are seeing, in which the 4 players that are standing on the platforms will use those as indicators as to which corresponding arrows they need to shoot on the wall. The players on the platform end up shooting the corresponding arrows based off of the runner's info, and usually have to synchronize the shots on the arrows at the same time to make sure the gates open up for the players that are inside the gauntlet, so they can run through without getting stuck, and essentially, since it's a timed section, they could die if they get stuck. Typically, the runner's main job is just to make their way around the ring, doing the callouts correctly so their teammates can open the gates, and then bring the ball that they're carrying into the middle and plant it. Once the players on the platforms have a typical understanding on how to shoot the arrows, you just have to watch out for an extra scion and make sure to punch them so it doesn't cause the round to wipe, and if done correctly enough times, all the players will be teleported in and they can run the gauntlet together and all deliver the last set of orbs that they need into the middle area. Now, essentially, in the speedrun side of things, since these guys are moving so quickly using the world line skating trick, when they get to the sequence where the 2 players are in the gauntlet running, typically they would move so fast that it actually wouldn't give them the indicator they need to call out to their teammates by the time that they get there, which essentially would put a cap on how quickly you can complete this section in. However, by utilizing the strategy with 2 players out of bounds, the 2 out of bounds players who can see through the wall can actually run alongside the runners in the ring, slightly ahead of them, which will trigger the gate to activate and open a couple of seconds earlier, which actually allows for a pretty big time save because they're able to not get caught up waiting for the gate to work. However, with 2 players on the outside of the map doing this, that leaves only 2 players on the inside of the map to manage all 4 platforms and switches completely on their own, while also being mindful of those scions that can cause a full-on wipe. It's really chaotic to see how these guys who are running the gauntlet on the inside and managing the platforms are able to completely keep up with everything that's going on while all this other stuff is going on. But sure enough, they're able to pull it off, and then after doing this 3 times, the 4 players will be teleported to the inside section. But right before they go in, they do a quick glitch where a player has a super run out at the right time of grabbing an orb, which allows the player who's doing the glitch to run ahead so that the first 3 gates will activate right away, while 1 player stays back activating the 4th gate so that the other players can just run in and dunk their orbs. During this time, the 4th player will do a call out to the 2 players who are still out of bounds and have them start heading to the next encounter, which will save time on traveling to the next section. Now, typically when you complete the gauntlet section and you're heading on to your next encounter, you have to go back out to the main plaza and do the whole flags, firefight, defense section again, which can take up some time, then make your way back into the Leviathan and travel over to the gardens where the dogs encounter starts. So essentially, the 4 players have to listen to the callouts from the 2 players on top and travel to one of the glowing flowers. The player on top will then shoot their seed at the flower and pollinate it, which gives all players a buff based off of how many spores you can get, and essentially the more flowers you get, the more of a buff you get when you enter the damage phase. When the damage phase starts, either when you've gotten enough flowers or when you've been spotted by the dogs, you'll have about 20 seconds to do as much damage to the dogs and then head into the safe room to avoid being wiped. From there, typically you probably would have to run it again and kill the dogs either on the second encounter, or if you did well enough on your first try sneaking around, you might have been able to kill your dogs and complete the encounter in your first try. But when these guys speedrun things, they do it quite a bit different. Now, the 2 out of bounds guys run straight in and clear the few ads that are there right away. During this time, they grab the 2 orbs and one of the players quickly times a rally flag, and if that's done correctly, this should both start the encounter and the flag should remain there, which is going to be a really useful item to have, as rally flags allow players to restock their ability and restock their ammo. Now, apparently this can be a huge run killer, as this glitch can be really inconsistent at times, but fortunately enough for this run, they got it to work. From there, absolute chaos happens as they decide to skip the entire pollination part and just go straight for trying to kill the dogs vanilla without any type of buff. Now, mind you, you have about 20 seconds to pull this off, or else it's a wipe, and that would be a complete run killer. They actually have a few different strats on how they coordinate taking out the dogs. A lot lot of the time it appears that a couple of players use tractors to keep the dogs in a single place or even overlapped with each other, and then use Nova bombs to quickly get high DPS to kill the dogs as fast as possible. Then they'll head to the rally flag in a staggered order to get more ammo and more power-ups as needed for taking out all of the dogs at the same time. Watching this, it's really confusing because it doesn't always seem like the players are going back to the same dogs and they're kind of crisscrossing and helping each other out, but it actually worked and they were able to clear it in such a fast amount of time. With this section completed, there's only really one more encounter before we get to the final boss fight. From there, a normal run, players would go back out and do the flags section another time, this time opening up the section for the bats. But in the speedrun version of this, one player immediately heads out of bounds and starts heading straight for the final boss fight, so that by the time the players complete the encounter at the bats, they can quickly join up on him later by backing out and rejoining the fire team. Now the rest of the team head to the bats using the World Line Zero trick, and of course time is really important here, and in this section they'll only be as fast as their slowest player because all players need to be in the area for the encounter to start. Now to run the bats section normally, you have to have players stand on one of 4 different plates and move this chain upwards by staying in the plate. Now this purple goo will damage you, so you have to have a power up that gives you a timer on the left hand side as to how long you can stay on the platform without taking damage. And then typically while 4 players are defending their plate, the other 2 players will run to the middle, grab a power up, and then run and switch out with one player who will then go and grab a power up and switch up with the other player, and they run this trade off in 2 teams of 3 until the chains are all lifted, where everyone then will move to the middle and start a damage phase shooting at these lanterns as quickly as possible while also not getting killed in the process. If they can break all the lanterns in time, they clear this encounter as well. However, if you haven't been able to tell already, the guys at the pool in the speedrun side of things are already at a disadvantage, only having 5 players instead of 6. So instead of doing 2 teams of 3, they're going to have to work as 1 team of 5. So the main strategy that they use is going in a clockwise fashion, where the one person who is the first switcher will run to one player, switch them out, where that player will get the power up, run to player 2, that player switches out, gets the power up, runs to player 3, and that player switches out and then runs to player 4, and so on until all of the chains are up. Now if they do this perfectly, they can actually do it without running into any problem, and they have to make sure they're timing this perfectly because they also have to know that their 6th player is on the move running to that final boss, and they don't want to waste any time because by the time he gets there they have to synchronize everything perfectly. From there, the players that are still at the pools will move to the middle and use Stormcaller to quickly take out the lamps while the other players protect and kill ads. After completing this perfectly, they actually timed the encounter up and the completion of this encounter perfectly with right when the 6th player is running into an out of bounds area that typically would want to teleport him back to his allies. So using a quick ghost cancellation trick, which stops the ghost animation from popping up on the screen, the other 5 players back out of the fire team, meaning the 6th player has nowhere to teleport to, and it allows him to continue on his out of bounds run. And honestly, this part timing up was so impressive looking over. And while he continues out of bounds, there's this exact section of the level that will load and randomly kill the runner. However, they found a trick where if you alt tab while mid-air where this loading sequence happens, it causes the frame rate to drop to 30 frames instead of 60 frames per second, and it actually avoids the character being killed. From this out of bounds section, the runner makes his way to the throne room, and then the rest of the players join back in and they can start up at the final boss encounter. Now typically in a regular run, 3 players stay in the void room and quickly call out the shapes to their teammates that they see on the forehead of this ghostly looking callus. The players in the throne room must punch the scion that their void room teammates did not call out to prevent the teammates that are in the void room from completely flying off the map. If done correctly and the void room players kill the scions along the way and survive to the end of the pathway without flying off, a damage phase on Callus will begin where the players can shoot skulls, allowing the throne room team to start doing damage on Callus, and soon after that the void players will teleport back into the main room and players can stand on the scion plates and have 4 short segments to do damage on Callus before finally defeating him, or if Callus still isn't defeated in the 4 segments, the 3 players can head back to the void room and do the callouts again, watching out for extra obstacles and of course flying off the map, and if they do it correctly, Callus will be defeated and the raid will be completed. Now for this, there's not a lot of things they can do to really skip too much ahead in the speedrunning side of things, except they save a ton of time when they get to the damage phase. The main strategy is to have every warlock using a Nova Bomb from except one player on Well of Radiance. The players that are going to stay in the Void stand near the first plate before teleporting to the Void because they're going to do a respawn trick that will help later on. They then go through the sequence doing the callouts normally, killing the Scions and hoping not to fly off the side of the map. However, once they've done their 3 or 4 callouts and they make their way to the bottom, 2 players that are in the Void room will kill themselves, and 2 players that are in the Throne room will also kill themselves, so that more skulls will spawn in the first part of the damage phase, and the one remaining player in the Throne room will start to revive the first player, and that player will revive the next player, and essentially there's this revive chain. This allows them to use their Nova Bombs right away and essentially melt a bunch of his health, but since they're doing it before the Void players would typically be teleported back, it actually bypasses an animation that happens when Kalos starts to break down from the damage. This actually saves quite a bit of time, and from there, when that final player finally returns, they use high DPS weapons to melt Kalos as quickly as possible. Now, one thing to note is that there is a frame rule on Kalos where the game only checks if Kalos is dead every 9 seconds, which is actually quite a long window. So if you move too slowly at taking out the last sliver of his health, you'll have to wait an extra 9 seconds before he is registered as defeated. Not a big deal if you're a casual player, but as a speedrunner, those 9 seconds are everything. And upon melting Kalos as quickly as possible, as soon as the raid completed thing pops up on the screen, the raid is completed, and these guys were able to break a world record, completing it in just 13 minutes 49 seconds. Honestly, this was so interesting to watch. We were originally planning on doing one video where we were going to cover all of the raids in one speedrun segmented type thing, but as we started to dig into what went into doing this single raid, we realized that they could really be divided into their own videos and given the attention that they deserve. So huge thank you again to Granger and Aoterra for letting us use their stuff and really helping us out with some of the specifics of this raid. But hey, if you liked this video, be sure to subscribe with notifications on for more videos just like this one. We're really trying to pump out new content and continue to up our game, so we really appreciate all of the support we've gained so far. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can follow me at Rocket Elijah, or you can follow Luke at Rocket Sloth Luke. We'll see you guys all next time with a brand new video. Bye guys.